G'day guys, and today I have some news from America for you. Now this is pretty interesting. It's been sort of overshadowed by the fact that the Democratic primary debates are happening at the moment, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. I'm actually going to watch those debates. Apparently they're quite interesting just to see just how far the Democrats have slid to, the really far left open border sort of thing. But I think it's important that we point out what former US President Jimmy Carter has had to say, and recently in an interview he's come out and in no uncertain terms, post-Mueller probe, he's come out and had said that Russia has most certainly influenced the 2016 US election and that Trump is an illegitimate president. So I've got a transcript from, I think, an interview he was doing, and I'll just read that up for you. So the interviewer says, "Russia has been proven by our intelligence community to have interfered with one of our human rights, which is the right of free and fair elections. What is your reaction? How should we deal with that?" So Carter responds, "The president himself should condemn it and admit it happened, which 16 intelligence agencies have already agreed to. And there is no doubt that the Russians did interfere in our election. I think the interference, although not yet quantified, when fully investigated, would show it's from the election in 2016. He lost the election and he was put into office because the Russians interfered on his behalf." So he's obviously saying in no uncertain terms that Trump is an illegitimate president based on this supposed Russian interference in this election, or this previous US election. And this is really interesting to me because I guess, as it's been pointed out by several people in the old media, I guess people just don't know that countries constantly interfere in other countries' elections. And it's interesting because on the surface, when you say something like election interference, that sounds pretty serious. That sounds like, the voting machines are being hacked, or the write-in ballots, they're being taken, rubbed out, and written in something else, something like that, something really, really dire and something very visceral. But the only provable interference that happened in the election was a group of Russians bought some Facebook ads. And no single individual has come forward and said, yes, I definitely voted Trump because of these Facebook ads. And also, this same Russian group also made Facebook ads for Bernie Sanders, but no one wants to talk about that. So yes, when you say the word interference, it does sound quite terrible and horrible, but when you actually, what was the actual interference? Well, it was a bunch of Facebook ads that did not swing any election in any way, shape or form. And as we all know, the Mueller report was in no uncertain terms, after spending $30 million investigating Trump and everyone connected to him for the last decades. I'd call that a pretty thorough investigation, but according to Mr. Carter, perhaps not. After spending $30 million and searching through everyone's dirty laundry, they found no evidence that linked Russia to Trump's campaign. There was no collusion with the 2016 election. Now, of course, a lot of people will just take this as they couldn't find the evidence. It's there, they just need to keep looking for it. But you're never going to convince those people anyway, and Mr. Carter appears to be one of them. But yes, in no uncertain terms, there's a 448-page document. It essentially sums up the Mueller report saying, look, there was no collusion. What really strikes me as interesting though, and this is why I wanted to make the video, is it's very strange to me that people look at 2016 and say, look, this is definitely the election where Russia interfered. There was collusion, there was this, the Russians wanted something, and they were going to, interfere with the US election in order to get it. And it is astounding to me that people can look at 2016 out of all the years in US political history and say, yes, that is certainly the election where we know that Russia was involved. Because these people, and this is a lot of people, seem to be completely forgetting about the Cold War. Now, clearly you would say the Cold War, well, during the period of the Cold War, up until the collapse of the Soviet Union, that was when tensions between, well, obviously the Soviet Union and the United States were at their highest. I mean, we're talking Cuban Missile Crisis, world almost ended in nuclear fire sort of stuff. You'd think if there was any period of time where Russia would have been trying to influence US elections, it was during that time. Because obviously the communists during the 20th century were incredibly interested in expanding. They wanted, communist revolutions all around the world, and there was a lot of proxy war, fighting in Afghanistan and Vietnam and that sort of thing. So the US were really interested in, making sure halting the spread of communism, and the communists were really interested in spreading it. So wouldn't that be the period of time within history where Russia would be interested in interfering with the elections? And it's interesting that Jimmy Carter says this. And if we look at, basic information on Jimmy Carter, I believe he was in office from 1977 to 1981. And if you know just a little bit about the Cold War history, well, you'll know that during the start of the late 70s, early 80s, there was a rekindling, so to speak, of the Cold War, and tensions were heightened again, and culminating in the aggressive foreign policies of Ronald Reagan. He basically said, if we want to end the Cold War, we've got to win it, and that's where things sort of reached a crescendo. But yes, so we're talking Jimmy Carter comes out, who served and had a presidential run during one of the most hot periods of political tensions between the US and Russia, and he went through all that, and then he looks at 2016 and says, when tensions are not as high, we're not, facing nuclear Armageddon, and he says, yes, the Russians most certainly interfered in this election out of all the other elections that they could have possibly interfered in. And this is just rubbish. This is just pure rubbish, plain and simple. It is absolutely astounding that a Cold War era president would come out and say this. And that is doubly so when you consider that this statement has come out post-Mueller report. The report that everyone who was ever camping on Donald Trump's Twitter feed and, rambling off things in the comments about how he was going to impeach and Mueller was going to get him, after that report essentially arrives with a flop and totally clears Trump of any wrongdoing, Carter still comes out and says this. It's so ludicrous, and I'm so lost as a cause for this that I do have to, bring up the fact that this dude is 94 years of age, and he may be demented, and he maybe have no idea what's going on, and maybe he's just forgotten that the Mueller report has totally cleared Donald Trump of any wrongdoing. There has been an incredibly thorough investigation, and all they got was Manafort laundering money 10 years ago, and some Russians bought some Facebook ads. No provable interference, no evidence of collusion, but this isn't enough for people with stage 4 terminal Trump derangement syndrome. It's been 3 years, but they just can't seem to get a grip on the fact that despite all the weaponized polling and how good things looked for the Democrats in 2016, they lost. And I have to say, it is so funny watching here from Down Under, watching all these idiot politicians and idiot pundits and idiot former presidents like Jimmy Carter working themselves into an absolute fucking tears because they just can't get over the fact that they lost in 2016. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.